Hey guys, so a request came in to show how I create my molds for my hearts. And so what I'm going to do is show you how I create the mold. There's already a video for making hearts, so I won't get into that part. So for the most part, the easiest thing for you to do is to go get a Tupperware that looks similar to this. What you want to look for is a flat bottom across. And then one, of course, that's going to accommodate the size of your heart that you're going to make. So this is what my heart mold looks like. I created this heart from clay, and then I cut it in half, and then I put a caudal around it and poured plaster. So this, as you can tell by the sides here, this was done from another Tupperware, and it was a wee bit small. But I ended up making two parts of it because I had a design on it. And this happens to be, if you can see that, it happens to have that swirl on there. And so I needed two halves. Typically when you're going to do these hearts, one half is enough. And then you just put them together. You do two in the same mold and then just put them together. But in this case, I wanted to have a wave here and a wave here. All right, so let's get to making the heart. So for making the heart, I'm just going to take this bunch of reclaimed clay that I have and then start my shaping. First thing I'm going to go for is a ball. Why shape the whole heart and not just a half? You could do that. For the mold, for the initial pour, I want it to be heavy and I want it to sink to the bottom. I don't want any chance of it lifting and plaster coming through. So I will make it solid, and it will be one half of this ball. Next thing, I'm going to go across half of it with any kind of stick, a dowel that you might have. And then I'm going to smash it down, pull this apart a bit, and now you can see the heart is starting to shape. I'm going to add a little bit on the bottom to be the tip. I'm rushing this heart. Normally I would take a bit of time to really shape it how I want it to be. I'm thinking about doing something a little bit different than this, just a little bit more pointy. So I can tell right now that this heart isn't perfect shaped on each side, but this side I'm not caring about too much because I'm going to end up cutting it. So the other thing too is, it might be kind of fun to do something like that, but then that would require two halves that I have to make. So I'm going to keep it straight. So I only have to have one side of the mold to use twice. All right, so now I have a heart that I want to use, and I'm going to stick it down like that. And normally I'd say go slice it halfway through, but in this case, I didn't make both sides equal, so I'm only gonna take the part that I want, which is this part here, and that's gonna be my new half heart mold. Preparing it for the dish. So what you could do is just score the bottom, spray some water. Now, I've done lots of molds with plastic, and I don't really need to prepare this surface. I just need to plop it in there, and then I'm moving it back and forth to make sure it's sticking to the bottom of the mold. Now what I'm going to do is, when I put it in there, I touched it, so I'm going to just smooth out where I touched it. Another thing that you might want to do is I'm just going to take a rubber tip now and go around the sides, smooth those out. Check it out. So it should stick on there like that. If you do happen to make a hollow heart, just make sure that you really seal the edges so the plaster doesn't get underneath it. So my next step now is to prepare the plaster and pour. So I'm going to set this aside. Okay, so I'm back and I have 2 buckets with me. They're the same kind of buckets, but first one I'm going to do is I'm going to, this empty one, they're the same size. I'm just going to put that on the scale and zero it out. So 0 pounds, take it off, put it on, back to 0. Okay, so now what I have to do is figure out how much water I need. And so in my calculations, I need 1.7 pounds of water. So let's see if I got that. No, I don't. That's 1.7. So the next thing I'm going to do is add plaster. Now what I could do is put this on here on there and then just start adding the plaster until I get to 2.7 pounds. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use what's called the island method for figuring out your plaster needs. So I'm going to go fill this up with plaster and then add it into this bit of water until I see islands forming, and I'll show you that as I'm doing it. So I used pottery plaster number 1. And I'm going to do this part outside. The other thing too is once you start using the plaster, it's really important to wear a mask. This is a N95 mask. So also, I am doing this in the studio. I never do plaster in my studio. I'm just being super careful right now. Plaster, if it gets mixed in with clay, can cause problems in the kiln. It can make things explode. So you want to keep plaster and clay very separate. But in this case, I'm just doing a small bit, so I am going to do it here in my studio. Normally, I do this outside, and I do it so the wind is carrying the particles away. Anyway, I'm going to put on my mask and get to the plaster and bring it back in here, and we'll resume. All right, sorry for the muffled voice. I got my mask on. So this is the plaster, and I did end up measuring it out. It's 3 pounds, and this is 1.7. Ratio is usually 1.5. So 1.7 over here, I'd have normally 3.2. I think the smaller you go, it's not as exact, but for bigger items, it's so. All right. So next thing I'm going to do, this is tepid water here. So you don't want to use cold or hot water, just kind of something in the middle. And now I'm going to add the plaster a little bit at a time. Normally I wear gloves. I can't find them. So here we go. I'm just putting the plaster in, scooping it in, and trying to distribute it equally around. So once it hits the water, it just kind of sinks in, and you can kind of see little islands starting to form. I don't know if you can see that there. Those are islands, and they're sinking pretty quickly. When you see that the islands, you know, there's some islands that stick around and maybe stay afloat for about 20 seconds or so, then you know you're ready. So my islands are staying put. I have this much left from 3 pounds. And as you can see right now, that island is just staying there. It's not going anywhere. So now I'm going to stick my hand in, normally with gloves. And I'm not doing this big motion. I'm just kind of feeling around for chunks and swirling a little bit. But if you swirl too much, you're going to agitate. You're going to speed the process up. And I don't want to speed the process up. You have about 20 minutes of working with the plaster right here, I think. The biggest stress for me with plaster is my dirty hands. So I always make sure I have water nearby to get my hands clear before going on to the next step. feels right to me. It's like thick, gooey cream. I'm gonna go wash my hands and be back. All right, now that now that the plaster is mixed, I'm gonna take my mask off, and now I'm gonna start the pour. I'm just gonna pour a little bit on top. All right, and the next thing that I do before I'm going to do any more is get a straw and blow around the heart and on the heart just to discourage any bubbles. One of the steps that I forgot to do is I probably could have done this for a little bit and let all the bubbles come up. So I'm going to just hit this to encourage the bubbles to come up. Next bit is to blow around the heart to make sure there's no bubbles. I don't know, you might argue I'm introducing bubbles. There's a lot of plaster in here. I should have done the blowing before so much plaster was in here. Have some plaster left over, and it's because it's, you know, when I did my measurements, I didn't subtract for the volume of the heart. So what I like to do is actually have extra forms around to deal with that extra plaster. So I have a hemisphere here. So I'm just going to pour it all in here. And once again, this is a fresh plastic here, so I don't really need to have a release agent. Anything other than plastic, you need release agents like cooking spray or dishwasher liquid. This case, now I want to make it. I'm going to displace some of the volume there. Once again, hands, stress, and plaster. I'm gonna go wash and then come back and deal with this. I could have saved some for inserting in here to have double plaster. There. That'll stay put. So when I do my nested molds, this is basically what I do, except for I have plaster in here as well. So what to do now? Now is to clean up your plaster and wait. We're going to wait 45 minutes and then we're going to release. So I'll come back then when it's ready to go. Hey there. So it's been about 45 minutes and that's typically the time when I will come in and release the molds. But there's still some water on top here. So I can feel that the mold, the plaster is setting up beneath, but the water has not absorbed back in. So one, I could have bad plaster, which I hope not. It's a fresh bag that I just got. Or I just need to, you know, we are in fall now. Maybe I need to give it more time to suck back in. So I'm going to leave this overnight, and then tomorrow I will show the release of the molds. Hey, so I'm back, and it's almost been 24 hours, and everything reabsorbed, and I'm hopeful that it's all right. So now we can just watch as I release everything. So this was the bit of water that I poured in to hold that, and let me get to this. So I'm just going to gently press on this. So just a little bit of cleanup there. And now I have my heart mold. So to get this out, sometimes I use a tool like this. I'm a little bit nervous to use a metal tool. I usually like to use wood. And incidentally, all this clay that's coming out is clay that I will never use again, except for maybe making molds. You know, I'll do that. So as I scoop out, I'm careful not to hit the sides. And at some point, you might just be able to grab in there and start pulling out. See how it's separated away? Haha, perfect. This is normal, what you see here. You have where the plaster got in a little bit. So in that case, I'm going to now take this metal tool that I said not to do against the sides and go around this part and just clean it up a little bit. So you can see the residue of the clay in there a little bit, and this is where it's good to have a sponge and just clean out that residue. Anyway, you can kind of look at it now. It looks all right. I have a little bit of an undercut thing happening right here. So what that means is that it kind of goes, clay could get stuck in there. So what I'm going to do is open that up a teeny bit. So I want to be able to release this clay that's in here without any worry of it getting stuck on the mold. So I'm getting rid of an undercut. That's what it's called. So it's not bad. The only other thing I would do next is to use some drywall sandpaper on here to smooth the edges a little bit. This is drywall sandpaper. Just getting it wet, and then I'm just going to go around the edges like this. So I think that looks really good. Now it just comes to the point of letting this cure, and that's going to be a couple weeks. I might try to make it go faster by putting it in the oven, but now I have my heart mold, and I'm ready to rock and roll. Let me show you about getting this other one out. Let's see, where's the best place to show you this? I'm still getting used to my new camera, so I apologize for getting out of frame sometimes. Yay! Now, sometimes what happens with these molds is I have a rough edge around here. So what I end up doing is taking a rib. I like these steel ribs, and what I end up doing is just going around them and scraping it. Much better. I will also take this drywall sandpaper and go around the edges as well. This is a nice size for when I'm doing mugs, to let it sit on here and dry to keep everything round. Let's talk real quick about disposal. So now I have some plaster in my water, and typically what you would do, like I have a bunch of property here, so I'm just gonna, I put it on the ground. It's earth, it goes back to earth. If you're in a urban area, you're gonna have to wait for the plaster in some water to settle at the bottom, and then siphon off the water, and then let the rest of the plaster dry, either in the container and let it, you can kind of punch out with plastic, and then throw away. Or what I do sometimes if I'm doing this at the studio is I'll line the buckets that I'm using with a plastic bag. So it just keeps, you know, that's one less thing to clean, is the surface of the bucket. And then I let it wait for it to separate, and then siphon off the water, and then let the plaster dry and throw it away. So it's a messy business. And once again, you want to keep it separate from your pottery. You don't want to contaminate it. And that's it. I hope that you guys try making your own hearts and your own heart molds and have fun with it. All right, catch you next time.